We're going to start this morning with each of the panelists doing a presentation. We'll start with Carol Gilligan, move to Pedro Noguera, and Niobe will conclude us. And then we'll have an opportunity to raise a few questions. I want to raise a few questions with the panelists. And then we'll open it up to the audience. So let's start.
Okay. It's easier to go up there. Pedro and I have been debating, should we stay here or go there? We thought you probably could see us better, right? If we stand, so I'm going to do that. That you've all committed a Saturday in December to this says so much to me, and I thank you for joining us. My oldest son, who happens to be working on climate change, brought a book with him this summer when he and his family came to visit us, and it's called Living in Denial by a sociologist named Kari Norgard. And it's about a town in Norway where the inhabitants, like many Norwegians, are very enlightened and very intelligent. They know the snow is melting. They can see it. They don't deny that. But they deny that climate change is happening. And it's a stunning book. I mean, if only to look at the cover because you just see the snow melting. But it really looks at what enables us to not know what we know. I mean, to not say what we see or not really think about what, in a sense, is in front of our eyes. And we come together today, in part because what has opened the window on education, what has been the lens that has really showed us something that we hadn't seen before, and I include myself in the we, which is why I was able to write about this, turns out to be gender, which is really very interesting. Gender. I thought it was about Latin verbs, that's how we learned about gender, French nouns, Latin verbs. And the interesting thing about gender is it's a binary. Masculine, feminine. What is masculine is not feminine. That was the grammar lessons. Remember trying to memorize, is the table feminine or masculine, that kind of thing. And it's also a hierarchy, like which is over which. And I think that cognitive structuring around our thinking, it's what, Piaget told classification, how do you classify everything, and seriation, which is higher and which is lower. So gender opened a window into seeing something that was right before our eyes that we hadn't seen. Now, for me personally, and this was in the 1970s, I hadn't seen that women weren't included among the humans that psychologists studied when they studied human development, which was really, psychologically speaking, fascinating. After all, how could I have not seen it? I used to, when I was asked to speak at the Harvard Club, and you would speak in these rooms with portraits of men all around the wall, and I would quote my father, who asked me one night at dinner. My father actually was a lovely, lovely man, but he said to me one night at dinner, "How'd you get interested in studying women?" And it really was a good question. And so I wrote in a different voice, which made the point very simply, that bringing women's voices into the so-called human conversation changes the voice of the conversation by giving voice to aspects of human experience that previously were not spoken and seen. Now, bring that title into a world which is cognitively structured around a binary and hierarchy, and in a different voice turns into in a woman's voice. That was not the title of my book. And the question that obsesses everybody becomes, who's better, women or men? If women and men are different, the only question we're interested in is who's right, who's wrong, who's better, who's worse. That's how you assimilate that kind of, it was called in a different voice, meaning women were holding aspects of human experience. So, following in a different voice and that conversation, I thought, one of the things I discovered by listening to women also was that the discussion of women's psychology was always in relation to men's psychology, women different from men, the same as men, who's different, who's better, was completely divorced from its roots or its history in girls' development. And in 1980, because it's not that far in the past, I read in the Handbook of Adolescent Psychology that girls had simply not been studied. The psychology of adolescence was, quote, the psychology of the male youngster writ large. The problem with women and girls was that they were seen to be too social and too emotional. In other words, because they were social and interested in relationships, they had no sense of self. And because they were emotional, they couldn't be rational. So, in other words, in the binary and hierarchy, social and emotional were gendered feminine, and at once, like women in patriarchy, which is a social order structured around a gender binary and hierarchy, where being a man means being not being a woman, and also being on top. Whatever is masculine is valued more than. Within that structure, social and emotional development was what was wrong with girls and women. And how could we get girls to be more autonomous and more rational, meaning more like boys? So that's what brings us into the present. I did a study with my students at Harvard. We did 10 years of research on to fill in this missing history that is girls' development, to bring girls' voices into the psychology of adolescence. And again, would it change our understanding of adolescence to bring in girls' voices and not just normed on the voices of mostly white boys? And the answer is, of course, it does. But what it did was really something none of us had expected, which is it showed us a moment of heightened intersection where psychological development comes, an intersection where psychological development collides with a culturally scripted and sanctioned process of initiation. That is, and here I want to fill in, and we have Lisa Elliott here today to talk with us about it, but as this work was starting on girls and where people were looking again at infants, the realization was that as humans, we are hardwired to connect emotion and thought. We are, as creatures, we are emotional, social, relational creatures who desire to live in connection with others and have the capacity, we're hardwired to cooperate. So if you want to initiate relational beings who have a capacity for empathy, to discern the thoughts and feelings of others into social structures, including the structures of the educational system, which require, in a sense, us to curtail our desire to empathy and for empathy and cooperation and so forth, you have to basically break these fundamental human capacities. Now, the interesting thing, and that's the initiation into a system that is radically individualistic, that is competitive, that separates thought from emotion, that separates mind from body. The interesting thing, and this was the cardinal finding of the girls' research, is that girls resist this initiation because they see that when they lose the capacity to say what they see, to ground their thinking in what they know through their experience, what they know in their hearts, what they know in their bones, they know in their bodies and through their emotions, they will begin not to know what they know. And then they can be captive to any kind of basically false authority. So the interesting thing is, like the healthy body resists disease, the healthy psyche resists these splits, these binaries and hierarchies that bifurcate human qualities into masculine and feminine and privilege the masculine over the feminine. So girls were resisting losing their humanity. Okay, fast forward. By the way, the work on girls' development highlighted a trajectory of resistance where a healthy resistance turns will you nil you into a political resistance in the sense that girls start to speak truth to power. They say what they know. And then they're under pressure to not say, at least not say, but ideally not know what they know. And that move, although it causes psychological trouble, that division, that self-silencing leads to depression, the division of mind from body. You see all the eating disorders, the cutting, the destructive behavior, so forth. It is in the short run adaptive, although it is psychologically costly. So a healthy resistance turns into a political resistance, turns into a psychological resistance or dissociation, and we start living in denial. So fast forward, what happens? Niobe Way does 20 years of research on boys. I mean, after the girls' research, Judy Chu and I had observed 4- and 5-year-old boys to ask, well, what's going on at that point where boys, more than girls, show signs of depression, attention and learning disorders and so forth, and we saw a similar resistance in these 4- or 5-year-old boys that was expressed more in action than in words. As they resisted a masculinity where being a boy means not showing vulnerability, acting as if you are not emotionally sensitive and so forth, you know this. Okay. So Niobe Way does this work with adolescent boys, and the huge discovery of her work, and I can't underestimate its significance, is guess what? Boys are humans. Now, the interesting question to me, and the question I hope we'll talk about today, is how did we manage not to know this? I mean, how do we manage not to know that girls not only feel but think? That, in other words, to have relationships, you have to have a self or voice. Otherwise, as any girl can tell you at 11 or 12, they, come in, Jerry, we're waiting for you.
There's a seat right up here, Jerry.
Well, there's a seat that has your name on it right here. This is Jerry Bruner, in case any of you, don't know this. So the question is the bifurcation of human qualities into masculine and feminine, and the privileging of the masculine over feminine, first of all, makes everybody half, boys and girls, half humans, and makes social and emotional development a problem suddenly because it's feminine and it's at the bottom of the hierarchy. And yet we know it's absolutely crucial, not only to academic success, but as Niobe Way's book tells us, to long life, to health, to everything else, and so forth. So the question right now, and children know this. I mean, the boys in Niobe's book say this over and over again. If you don't have a close friend to share your secrets with, you would go wacko. Girls will tell you. A 16-year-old in my city says, the voice that stands up for what I believe in has been buried deep inside me. And it's so interesting to me because buried means it's still there. And that work wants to be reported as girls lose their voices. Girls don't lose their voices. They know they hold a voice that's not listened to or that's denigrated in silence. So for today, I hope we will start with, like children, knowing what we know and raise the question together. This is an extraordinary opportunity, which is how do we stop living in denial? How do we act on what we know to educate the 21st century child to live in the 21st century world, which is, and not lose those human capacities that are really vital now to probably to the survival of the species. Thank you very much.